Susan traced the hard, round curve of her belly, the slight, rhythmic pressure of the baby shifting within a familiar comfort now. 8 months pregnant, her body was a testament to the safe, stable life she had meticulously constructed. She was anchored by routine, by a fulfilling career hiatus, and most profoundly by Richard. Richard, her partner, was the very definition of steadfast devotion. He'd spent the morning assembling the crib with painstaking care, humming off-key, pausing only to bring her orange juice and a gentle foot rub. He was her safe harbor, the reliable quay in her life, the absolute antithesis of the wild, unpredictable current of Mark that had almost dragged her under 4 years prior. She closed her eyes, clutching the image of their perfectly neat, sun-drenched apartment, visualizing a world without Richard. The image was impossibly cold, stark, and empty, a place she refused to revisit. This life was her fortress. The doorbell rang, a sharp, violent chime cutting through the domestic bliss like a warning siren. Richard was out, having rushed to the hardware store for the perfect, specific shade of baby blue paint samples. Susan waddled to the door, feeling heavy and awkward, her heart inexplicably beginning to pound. Peering through the peephole, her breath hitched, catching painfully in her throat like a jagged shard of ice. Standing there, lean and shadowed by the afternoon sun, was Mark. Mark, her first love, the elemental force that had wrecked her. The man who had walked away 4 years ago with a single, brutal email, leaving a deep, painful crater where her future used to be. She opened the door, bracing her entire weight against the frame, instantly feeling the old, familiar dizziness of desire and fear under his gaze. "What in God's name are you doing here?" Her voice was a dry, accusatory rasp of disbelief. Mark's eyes, those familiar, stormy gray eyes that could once dismantle her soul, swept over her, lingering pointedly on the undeniable, massive evidence of her pregnancy. A flicker of something primal, shock, perhaps proprietorial anger, maybe genuine regret, crossed his face before settling into a practiced, devastating composure. "Susan," he said, his voice a low, rough rumble of memory that hadn't aged a day. "I know the timing is bad, terribly bad actually, but I came back for you. I was hoping we could finally reclaim our second chance." He gestured vaguely at her stomach, the sheer audacity staggering her. Who is the father? The nerve of his timing, his unwarranted presence, and his demand for information stole her voice. The baby kicked, a hard, protesting jab beneath her ribs, a physical reminder of the life Mark had zero claim to. Susan felt a tremor run through her, part old, dangerous longing, part furious, protective resentment for Richard. Her perfect, meticulously built world was suddenly vibrating with catastrophic instability, and she knew she had to close the door before the seismic event reached Richard. "You left me, Mark. You annihilated me when I needed you most. You don't get to waltz back into my life at 8 months pregnant and demand answers about the future you destroyed," Susan retorted, stepping back into the apartment and letting the door swing mostly shut. The door was not just wood. It was a psychological barrier she desperately needed. The tremor of fear in her voice was quickly replaced by a cold, protective resolve she had learned from Richard. Mark pressed forward, pushing the door open slightly, his hands held up in a false gesture of surrender. "I know I messed up, Susan. Terribly. But I never forgot you. I've spent 4 years trying to reconcile my life, fixing myself, so I could return and be the man you deserve. I saw your picture online, a friend's candid shot, and I realized I couldn't bear the thought of another day without you, baby bump or not." He stepped closer, his shadow consuming her in the afternoon light. "The man I deserve is right here," Susan affirmed, laying a hand protectively over her bump, her wedding band, Richard's ring, glinting like a shield. "He's supportive, he's committed, he helped me put the pieces of my life back together, and most importantly, he has never, ever run away." She remembered the endless, tear-filled nights she'd spent agonizing over Mark's sudden, cruel departure. The sheer memory of that agonizing vulnerability now fueled her anger like gasoline. Mark's gaze darkened, his jaw tightening as he surveyed the domestic comfort of the living room, dismissing it with a glance. Does he know what we had? Does he know that what we shared was the kind of transcendent, consuming connection people spend lifetimes searching for, a kind of fire he could never, ever kindle with his gentle stability? What we had is history, and history burns everything around it, she stated firmly, though she felt the conviction wavering. The old, dangerous pull he exerted was still there, a magnetic current under her skin, tempting her toward beautiful, disastrous chaos. She could still recall the scent of his cologne, the rough texture of his hands, the specific arrogant tilt of his head when he laughed. Details Richard, for all his wonderful gentle stability, could never truly erase, only manage to soothe. The car door slammed outside. Susan instantly froze, her eyes widening in pure panic. That's him. Richard, you need to leave. Now. Mark looked towards the sound, his face hardening into something unreadable. A mix of challenge, proprietary shock, and sudden, cold calculation. He took a final, long look at Susan, drinking in her distress. Fine, he murmured, his eyes locking onto hers with a possessive promise. But this isn't over, Susan. Not for me. I'll be in touch soon. Count on it. He turned quickly, disappearing down the stairs just as the key turned in the lock. Richard entered, holding a massive, rolled-up poster of a cheerful cartoon giraffe. Sorry I took so long. Traffic was awful. Hey, who was at the door? He asked, oblivious to the emotional hurricane he'd missed. You look pale, honey. Are you okay? Did you forget to eat? Or is it just the third trimester slump? Susan forced a shaky smile, tucking the dangerous memory of Mark away like a forbidden relic into a box sealed with a lie she instantly regretted. Just a delivery guy with the wrong address. I'm fine, sweetheart. Just tired. She let the weight of the lie settle between them, heavy and suffocating, insulating Richard from the chaos she was now facing alone. That night, Susan couldn't sleep. The emotional tremors Mark had caused made the mattress feel like shifting sand beneath her. She walked out to the living room, staring blindly at the dark contours of the furniture. The mere, brief presence of Mark had scraped open an old wound, exposing the raw, tender flesh of her memory. Their history had been a tempest, a passionate, all-consuming flame that had burned with such intensity it left them both scorched and exhausted, consuming their world too hot, too fast, leaving only painful ashes. They met in a university library, their connection instant and visceral. An exchange of shy smiles over stacks of dusty philosophy books quickly spiraled into an inseparable bond. Mark was magnetic, ambitious, mercurial, and prone to grand, dramatic, often reckless gestures. He'd once driven 3 states just to bring her a specific kind of rare, deep red rose, claiming only that intense color matched her soul's fire. But this intensity came with a shadow. He was deeply troubled, constantly shadowed by a complicated family history he absolutely refused to discuss, often withdrawing into silent, brooding moods that left Susan feeling isolated and desperate for his return. The end had come abruptly, devastatingly. He'd been quiet for days, distant and cold, barely touching her, seemingly preparing for a blow. Then, the single, concise email arrived. I'm leaving the country. This isn't fair to you. Don't look for me. Live your life. No phone call, no explanation, no chance for closure, just a clean, surgical, brutal cut. Susan had spiraled into months of misery, analyzing every word and missed signal, convinced she was fundamentally flawed and the hidden reason he fled. The experience shattered her trust in passion itself. Richard, who had been a friendly, reliable acquaintance in her social circle, picked up the pieces of her life slowly, patiently. He was the gentle balm to her self-inflicted chaos, the steady, predictable sun to Mark's unpredictable, violent storm. Richard never pressured her for details about her past pain, simply offering a steady shoulder and gentle reassurance until she was finally ready to stand on her own again. Their love grew deliberately, rooted in friendship, mutual respect, and shared, achievable values. A calm, deeply rooted connection that felt less like a dizzying adventure and more like an essential warm home. Now, seeing Mark's familiar, demanding intensity, Susan felt the foundations of her life shifting. Was stability truly enough, or had she merely settled for comforting peace when her heart still secretly craved that old, destructive fire? She reached for her phone, tempted to search for him, for some explanation, some justification for his dramatic return. But she stopped herself, staring at her own reflection in the dark screen. She was a woman anchored in duty now. She was a mother. She was Richard's partner. That old fire was destructive, and she wouldn't risk her future for its brief, painful warmth. She sighed, moving to the nursery, where the cartoon giraffe poster was now taped up. She smoothed the paper, a deep pang of guilt hitting her. Richard deserved her complete honesty, but the memory of Mark's stormy gray eyes that had briefly held the desperate, possessive reflection of her home, held her tongue captive. The following week, Richard's mother, Mrs. Hayes, arrived to finalize the details for the baby shower. She was a sweet, slightly dotty woman, prone to sentimental oversharing, and fiercely proud of her only son, Richard. While Richard was safely at work, Mrs. Hayes was delightedly showing Susan ancient photo albums, a sentimental, chronological catalog of Richard's life from babyhood to high school graduation. Susan tried to focus on the happy commentary, but the phantom presence of Mark was a persistent, unwelcome watermark on the background of every picture, haunting her peripheral vision. "Oh, look at this one," Mrs. Hayes exclaimed with a fond sigh, pointing to a grainy photo of a young Richard, perhaps 7 years old, grinning sheepishly beside a stern-looking man, Richard's father, and herself. "That was our last wonderful family trip to the coast, before everything changed and the family fractured." Susan smiled politely, projecting a forced, calm interest. "He looks so genuinely happy." Then Mrs. Hayes flipped the page to a photo taken a few years later. The same group was present, enjoying a slightly stiff outdoor picnic, but this time, another boy, slightly older than Richard, was clearly visible in the background, lurking near a bicycle. The boy was partially obscured by shadow and the distance, yet something about the posture, the intense, rebellious angle of his jaw, made Susan's blood run cold, stopping her heart mid-beat. She felt a sickening, awful lurch in her stomach. "Who is that, standing so far away by the bike?" Susan asked, her voice barely a controlled whisper, the question tearing itself from her throat against her will. Mrs. Hayes's face instantly clouded over, the forced cheer draining away entirely, replaced by a brittle, protective tension. She quickly slammed the page shut. "Oh, no one, dear. Just an unfortunate friend of Richard's from school. We don't talk about that time much. It was a very stressful period, and we moved shortly after." She gave a forced, unsettlingly bright smile that didn't reach her eyes. But Susan had already seen enough, and the defensive, immediate closure was a glaring signpost. She quickly flipped back the page when Mrs. Hayes was distracted by a phone call from the caterer. She stared intensely at the blurry figure, recognizing the signature posture, the unruly dark hair, and the familiar, distinct bone structure of Mark's face. The genetic link was impossible to deny. They were undeniably brothers. Before Mrs. Hayes returned, Susan noticed a small, faded inscription written in Richard's childish handwriting beneath the photo, now tragically prophetic. "Me and my brother." The room spun, the colorful walls of the nursery blurring into a sickly haze of betrayal. Brother. Richard was Mark's brother. The man who had callously abandoned her was intrinsically, biologically tied to the man who was the father of her child. The man she loved, the man who was her rock, was part of the same genetic material as her greatest source of pain and chaos. The silence of the apartment felt deafening, replaced by a furious, buzzing static in her ears. The carefully constructed walls of her life didn't just vibrate. They shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces of lies and omissions. She closed the album, her hands shaking violently with mounting fury, and knew she had to demand the truth, regardless of the devastation it would surely bring to both their futures. Richard returned home an hour later, finding Susan seated rigidly on the sofa, her face set in a mask of cold accusation. The old photo album was placed pointedly and accusingly on the coffee table, open to the photo of the two boys. The air was heavy, thick with charged, imminent cataclysm. He immediately sensed the monumental shift in the atmosphere. It was not a domestic argument, but an execution. "Susan? What's wrong? What happened? Did the baby kick too hard?" he asked, dropping his briefcase and rushing to her side. His concern genuine and immediate, failing to register the silent gravity of the album. She didn't look up, instead keeping her gaze fixed on the grainy photograph. Her voice was flat, toneless, devoid of the warmth he loved, replaced by a cold control. "Tell me the truth, Richard. All of it. About your family. About your brother." Richard froze mid-step, the photograph finally registering. The blood drained from his face, leaving a sickly gray pallor. He didn't ask how she knew or who had told her. He knew the secret was out. He simply stared at the album, the past he had carefully and fearfully guarded for 4 years now brutally exposed. "Susan, I was going to tell you. I swear. I just couldn't find the right time. Don't lie to me. Not one more time. I need to hear it all from you. Tell me about Mark Hayes," Susan demanded, finally looking up, her eyes blazing with a devastating, cold clarity that cut him to the core. Richard sank onto the edge of the sofa, defeated, running a shaky hand through his hair. He is my half-brother. Same mother, different biological fathers. It was always a messy, dysfunctional situation. My mother had Mark very young, and when she met my father, they tried desperately to create a perfect family unit, but Mark was always the outsider, the living consequence of the past. He was always resentful, always angry, a walking storm of conflict. He explained that Mark was the disruptive, chaotic element in their family, constantly drawing unwanted attention and friction. For years ago, Mark had been involved in a devastating financial scandal that deeply embarrassed their mother, Mrs. Hayes, and threatened Richard's own burgeoning career prospects. Richard had spent months trying to repair the damage and mitigate the consequences, culminating in Mark's abrupt decision to leave the country and cut all ties. "When I met you again, Susan, when we started getting serious, I knew you were the girl he left. I recognized you instantly. I was terrified. I couldn't bear the thought of losing you, not after all the pain you'd already been through. I thought if you knew, you'd either run back to him, chasing the chaos, or maybe just run away from both of us, from the instability he brings." Richard confessed, his voice thick with shame and desperation. "I should have told you. It was the deepest mistake of my life, the only truly dishonest thing I've ever done. I just didn't know how to risk our whole future by revealing my tainted past." Susan absorbed the devastating truth, the calculated deception, the deliberate, carefully managed omission. "So, you just watched me suffer, knowing your brother caused the worst pain of my life? And you built our entire relationship, our home, our family on a lie of omission, all the while knowing he was out there, capable of walking back in at any time and proving your foundation was false." The lie felt like a profound, structural betrayal, a fatal flaw in the very foundation of their partnership. The ground had disappeared beneath her feet, and she felt impossibly, desperately adrift in a sea of broken trust. The days that followed the confession were a suffocating cycle of strained silence and cold emotional warfare. Susan retreated into the solitary space of her mind, the presence of Richard, her supposed sanctuary, now feeling like a brightly furnished prison built on sand. Richard tried everything, endless, desperate apologies, meticulous explanations of his terror of abandonment, and quiet acts of service, but the fissure between them felt miles wide, a canyon of mistrust carved out by his fear. She simply couldn't reconcile the kind, reliable man who patiently bought her prenatal vitamins with the man who concealed a life-altering, family-defining secret that had caused her 4 years of agonizing pain. Meanwhile, Mark, sensing the widening crack in her relationship with his brother, reappeared more boldly, his timing impossibly sharp. He sent texts that were not overtly manipulative, but simply recounted shared, electric memories, subtly reminding her of their deep, tumultuous connection. His words were precise, tailored to her old vulnerabilities, and his presence felt like the only light that truly saw the chaos in her soul. Remember the rain in Paris, Susan? That's what we were. A beautiful, unstoppable storm. Did you truly want the sunshine? One evening, Mark found her sitting alone on a park bench near their apartment, needing air and emotional space. He sat beside her, maintaining a careful, charged distance, his intensity drawing every eye in the vicinity. He kept me a secret because I am the chaos, Mark stated quietly, his gaze fixed on the distance. Richard is the golden child, the safe one, the one Mom groomed for success and introduced to all her influential friends. I was the mistake, the inconvenient history of her poor choices and rebellion. I was the dirt she wanted swept under the rug. He admitted he'd seen Richard with her before, months ago, long before his sudden return. When I saw you two together, settling into this perfectly neat life, I felt like I was losing everything all over again. My past, my chance at redemption. I should have come back sooner, but I knew I had to respect your choice. Seeing you now, pregnant, seemingly happy, carrying his child, it's worse than I imagined. Did you know I was pregnant when you returned and asked to take me back? Susan asked, her voice tight with residual accusation and a desperate need for clarity. No, he whispered, turning his stormy eyes towards her. I just knew I had to see you and apologize for leaving. But when I saw you carrying his child, carrying my brother's child, the world inverted. It felt like a cruel, twisted punishment for my cowardice. Mark then presented his full appeal, his final, seductive hand. Richard is undeniably good, Susan, but he lied to secure comfort. He hid me because he knew I was the stronger, deeper pull, the only one who matched the intensity of your soul. I know who you are, the fire, the recklessness, and the vulnerability. He built a safe life for you, but I can offer the profound, honest passion and consuming connection you always craved. Don't settle for safety just because you're scared of the truth that we are meant to be together. Consequences be damned. Susan looked from Mark's intense, demanding eyes to the path leading back to her apartment. She was torn between the desperate, familiar urgency Mark represented and the profound, wounded, but deeply rooted love she still held for Richard. The love triangle wasn't just between two men. It was a devastating conflict between two fundamental versions of her own future, and she needed to know if the foundation she'd built with Richard was strong enough to withstand this cataclysmic earthquake of truth. The confusion, the emotional rawness, and the crushing weight of Mark's dramatic, self-sacrificing revelation culminated that night. Susan couldn't bear the silent, aching chasm between her and Richard anymore. She sat him down, demanding an hour of total, brutal honesty, not about the past and the family secrets, but about them, their present, their future, their core commitment. She put Mark's toxic seed on the table. Why did you truly choose me, Richard? Was it just a protective impulse? Was it subconsciously to win over the girl your chaotic brother abandoned? To prove you were the better man? Richard's eyes were filled with unshed tears, the sincerity of his pain devastating to witness. No, Susan, never. I chose you because of the way you laughed, that genuine, unrestrained sound, the day you finally let me see your apartment. I chose you because I saw the courage it took for you to let someone back into your life after Mark. I saw the genuine soul he broke, and I swore to myself I'd protect it and love it back to complete health. Keeping my history secret was wrong, cowardly, and manipulative, and I will regret that singular lie forever. But my love for you, the life we built, is the most honest, pure thing I've ever achieved in my life. I love the life we built, not the person Mark discarded. The genuine, unadorned pain in his eyes was undeniable. He wasn't the chaotic fire, but he was her essential warmth, her grounding force, and he was being honest now. Susan reached out, taking his hand, pulling him closer to physically bridge the painful distance. There was no need for further words, only a desperate, profound need to reconnect, to excise the emotional infection that had formed between them. They moved slowly to the bedroom, the silent language of their bond taking over. The intimacy wasn't about passion or heat. It was a desperate, tender search for solid ground in a world that had tilted sideways, a physical act of forgiveness and reaffirmation. Richard was slow, careful, and deeply worshipful, acknowledging the life they had created and the fragile, precious state of her body. His touch was a desperate conversation. "I see you. I apologize. I swear I will never break your trust again. I love you, and I am here." Susan clung to him, weeping silently against his shoulder, letting the emotional residue of the week wash away in quiet tears. This was where she belonged, in the protective, strong arms of the man whose touch felt like a tangible, immediate promise of forever. It was a reclaiming of their shared history and future, a quiet affirmation that this life, this child, and this deeply rooted love were real, built on something far more resilient than Mark's magnetic but destructive flame. In that profound closeness, the shame, the anger, and the betrayal were not instantly erased, but finally integrated into their complex, true story. When it was over, Susan felt utterly exhausted but profoundly renewed. The emotional chaos had yielded to a powerful, quiet certainty. She knew who her partner was, and she knew who she was definitively choosing. The ghost of Mark felt a little less potent, a little less real, exiled by the truth. The next day, Mark, having received Susan's silent rejection the previous night, was waiting in the hallway outside her door for his final gambit. He looked impeccably dressed, intensely focused, and dangerously desperate to win. He held a small, black, velvet-covered box in his hand, a prop in his final scene. "I need to say this once, and then I swear I will accept and respect your decision, whatever it is, and disappear forever," he started, his voice firm, bypassing any pleasantries or apologies for his presence. "I know about the baby. I know about Richard. But you need to know this. I was planning to propose to you 4 years ago. That's why I left, Susan. My mother threatened to expose a massive, damaging financial secret about my biological father. A secret that could have ruined her, Richard, and Richard's stepfather, crippling their financial security. She told me the only way to protect them and ensure Richard's successful future was for me to disappear and cut off all family ties completely. I couldn't risk dragging you into my mess, into my family's disaster, so I took the blame and the pain." Susan stared, dumbfounded, the air rushing out of her lungs. His story, while tragic, felt like another form of control. "You chose a noble lie over honest communication? You preferred me to think you were heartless. I chose to break my own heart, Susan, not yours. I genuinely thought you'd be better off thinking I was a monster than knowing the toxic truth of my family's darkness," he pleaded, his voice breaking for the first time. He opened the velvet box. Inside lay a simple, elegant engagement ring with a small, brilliant diamond. "I carried this with me for 4 years all over the world. This my proof of intent. If you choose me, we leave today. We cut ties with the Hayes family, with the lies, with the betrayal. We start fresh, just us and your beautiful child." He had stripped away all her defenses, exchanging his past perceived cruelty for selfless, albeit misguided, sacrifice. The decision was no longer between the safe man and the chaotic man, but between the noble liar who fled out of misguided protection and the convenient liar who stayed silent out of fear of loss. Just then, Richard arrived, his keys jangling in the lock. He took one look at Mark, the open box, and Susan's stricken face, and his chest heaved with raw, heartbroken pain, understanding everything in an instant. "Mark, get out of my home," Richard said, his voice deadly quiet, his face pale with fury and desperation. "You forfeited the right to be here 4 years ago when you made a unilateral decision about her heart." Mark ignored Richard, his gaze fixed solely on Susan, forcing her to make the final, devastating call. "It's now or never, Susan. Choose your truth. Choose the foundation you want for your child." Susan took a deep, trembling breath, placing both hands on the heavy, protective weight of her belly, the weight of her commitment to Richard. She looked at the ring, then at Mark's desperate, intense face, and finally, settled her gaze on Richard, whose vulnerability was heartbreakingly clear, standing ready to fight for her, despite his flaws. She saw the man who never ran, who put up a cheerful giraffe poster, who confessed his fear. "I choose Richard," she said, her voice stronger and clearer than she thought possible, ringing with finality. "He may have lied by omission, but you lied by absence, Mark. And I need a stable, honest, imperfect presence now, not a manipulative ghost of what could have been." Mark's eyes closed briefly, a flicker of true, devastating defeat washing over him. He snapped the box shut, gave Richard one last, poisonous look of deep disappointment, and walked away without another word. The door clicked shut, and the unbearable tension in the hallway broke, leaving Susan suddenly exhausted, and alone with the man she had just publicly, definitively chosen to be her family. The profound intensity of the confrontation with Mark, the emotional finality of her choice, left Susan completely drained. The stress had peaked and broken her physical barriers. She hadn't even made it back inside the apartment when a sharp, undeniable pain seized her, gripping her lower abdomen like a vice, squeezing the breath from her lungs. It was unlike anything she had felt before. A powerful, deep, involuntary gasp escaped her lips, the sound cutting through the silence of the aftermath. "Richard?" she managed, clutching his arm, her eyes wide with shock and sudden, physical terror. I think the baby is coming. Now, the choice is made." All drama vanished. Richard snapped into action, his panic replaced by focus. He was the stable anchor again, precisely when she needed him most. He gently helped her back inside, grabbed the pre-packed hospital bag, and got her into the car, his own hands shaking with adrenaline as he drove meticulously, yet quickly, towards the hospital. The labor was fast and furious, the overwhelming pain consuming any residual emotional turmoil left over from the day. Richard was a tower of strength, his soothing voice reciting nonsensical affirmations he'd read in a forgotten parenting book, holding her hand so tightly she could feel the bones pressing into her skin. He was present, completely and unequivocally hers, grounding her in the physical reality of their shared creation. Then, hours later, in the delivery room, during a brief lull between contractions, the door opened quietly. It wasn't a nurse or a doctor. It was Mark. Richard instantly glared, ready to leap to his feet and explode with protective fury. "What the hell are you doing here? I told you to leave her alone." Mark held up his hands, his face pale with worry and stress, looking impossibly out of place in his tailored clothes amidst the chaos of birth. "Mom called me. She found out Susan was in early labor from Richard's frantic call and told me you needed support." "Richard, I told her I'd come. I couldn't stay away. I won't interfere, I promise. I just need to be near, for the baby, for Susan. For my peace. I need to witness the truth." Susan, panting heavily through a fresh, building contraction, looked at Mark. He looked genuinely terrified and utterly helpless. She looked at Richard, who was torn between his furious protectiveness and his absolute need to focus on her. She made the final, decisive, generous choice that integrated the past and protected her present. "Richard, it's okay," she wheezed, squeezing his hand. "Let him stay. In the corner. Just stay with me. This is your moment." Mark retreated, standing silently by the window, a pale shadow. He was a witness to the profound moment, a symbol of the history that led them here, but Richard was the partner, the one anchored firmly by her side, sweat dripping from his brow, his heart solely focused on her. As Susan pushed with all her might, the two brothers, the light and the dark, the past and the present, stood on either side of the moment, held together by the gravity of the woman they both loved and the new life she was bringing into the world. The room was filled with the sound of Susan's pain, the quiet, steady encouragement of Richard's voice, and the breathless anticipation of a shared, final dawn. The strong, angry, beautiful cries of a newborn pierced the tense silence of the delivery room, announcing the definitive arrival of their daughter. Susan felt an immediate, overwhelming wave of unconditional love, a purity of emotion that washed away all the pain and drama of the preceding weeks. A girl. She looked at her daughter, small, wrinkled, and perfect, and all the previous conflict, the secrets, the betrayals, the choices, seemed to shrink into utter, manageable insignificance. Richard, tears streaming down his face, cut the cord, his expression a landscape of overwhelming love and awe, his identity as a father sealing his place. He gently laid the baby, still wet and slippery, on Susan's chest. "She's beautiful, Susan. Absolutely beautiful. She's perfect," he whispered, kissing her wet forehead with profound reverence and gratitude. "Thank you." Mark moved slowly from the corner, stopping at the foot of the bed, no longer arrogant but humbled. He didn't speak a word, just stood there, his stormy eyes softened, defeated, yet finally accepting of his exclusion from this sacred circle. Susan looked up at him, fatigue heavy in her limbs but certainty absolute in her heart. "Mark, I meant what I said. I chose the life I built. I chose my imperfect, honest future." He nodded slowly, a deep sigh escaping his chest, acknowledging the undeniable reality before him. "I know, Susan, and I see that now clearly. He didn't just rebuild your life after I tore it down. He made it stronger, more real, more deserving. You deserve this peace. You deserve him, and a life free of the destructive chaos of my family." He paused, his gaze softening as he looked at his niece for the first time, a complicated mix of longing and acceptance. "She has your eyes, Susan. The fire is still there, but it's contained now." He offered a strained, genuine smile to Richard. "Congratulations, brother. Take care of them both. They're worth everything." Without waiting for a response or any lingering drama, Mark turned and quietly left the room, closing the door firmly on the ghost of their past and the end of the love triangle forever. Later, in the quiet, soft light of the private recovery room, Richard sat beside Susan, the baby peacefully cradled gently in his strong, steady arms. "I love you more than I can ever say," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "I am sorry for the secret. I promise you, from this day forward, no more lies, ever. Just us and our girl." "I know, Richard," Susan whispered, reaching out to stroke the baby's impossibly tiny hand. "It's over now. The past is outside that door, and it can't hurt us in here. It only made us stronger." The baby opened her eyes, clear and bright, and focused on her parents' faces, an innocent witness to their peace. The love Susan felt for Richard, the father of her child, the man who stayed, the man who was stable, was now irrevocably bound to the beautiful, imperfect future they had created together. It wasn't the fiery, consuming passion of her youth, but a deep, resilient, and utterly satisfying love, the kind that survives secrets, rivalries, and dramatic returns. She had chosen security, honesty, and family. She had chosen her new dawn. And as she watched Richard gazing at their daughter, the love in his eyes absolute, she knew with complete conviction that she had chosen correctly. Like and subscribe for more stories like this.